Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the VSI virtual pub. This evening, I'm joining you from the beer garden. I thought I'd take advantage of the good weather. And as I'm looking online here, I can see that there's people from all over the world, Argentina, USA, Spain, Morocco. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the good weather and you're looking forward to an entertaining evening with us tonight. Tonight, we've got media royalty. Jonathan Northcroft, Chief Football Correspondent from the Sunday Times since 2009. He's going to be having a conversation with sports psychologist and landlord of the pub, Michael Caulfield. Jonathan is well known for his insights into the world of football, and he's also written a number of books, most notably Fearless, on how Leicester City shook up the Premier League, and one on Manchester United called Opus, which, as a Manchester City fan, I'm not going to pay too much attention to. Tonight, Michael will lead the procession and the conversation with the guys. But before I hand over to Michael, I'm going to hand over to Tim Coates, who is going to explain how you guys on the platform can ask questions to Jonathan as we go along. Tim?
Cool, thanks, Tony. If you're lucky enough to be a panelist and if you're lucky enough to be an attendee on the webinar, then you can ask questions. If you're watching this live stream on YouTube, you can't. So if you want to ask a question, you're going to have to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you're on Zoom, that is the way to answer questions. And then we'll ask them if it's relevant as we're going on through the conversation. If not, we'll ask at the end. We'll pick 2 or 3 of the best questions. From there, and without further ado, I can hand this over to the landlord of the Shankly Arms. So I'm sure he'll explain very, very soon. Mr. Michael Caulfield with the accolade.
Good evening and thank you, and good evening everybody. Welcome to the Shankly Arms. Shankly is that side of the door, and if he wakes up, you'll certainly hear him this side of the door in a moment. But more importantly, the guest tonight in the Shankly Arms is Jonathan Northcroft. Jonathan, good evening.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Jonathan. We met virtually for the first time last week. I'm going to be very honest here as the landlord of the pub. I enjoyed your company then. I'm looking forward to it just as much tonight because you're an Aberdonian, you're an Aberdeen man through and through. So congratulations for that. We'll come on to them later. And we've got listeners and watchers tonight, I believe, Jonathan, from Argentina, Morocco, Spain, as we just heard. And you're in Leicester, and you're in the good old heart of the Midlands in Leicester. And that was the title of that great book, Fearless, because that was a season we'll never see again. How is Leicester, Jonathan? Is it got the hang still of being Premier League champions? Because it shook up everything.
It's getting there, Michael. I mean, it's one of the pleasures of writing a book as opposed to writing newspaper stuff. Is I suppose you write something for a newspaper and it's gone tomorrow, or it's gone in a couple of days' time. And a book hangs around for a little bit longer. And one of the sort of nice things is I get people coming up to me saying, Leicester fans saying, you know, I wasn't ready to read your book at the time. I wasn't ready to think about winning the title at the time. It all seems so surreal. It all seems so weird. And now I'm kind of in a place to be able to do it and to be able to process it. And that people are still processing it now. People are still kind of going back to the story and thinking, wow, that actually did happen, and trying to make sense of it. I think I always see the Leicester story as one of 2 halves. And the first part of the story is winning the title. And it was this incredible miracle, this whatever cliche you want to call it. But the second half of the story was VSI dying, the owner. And I think it was only when he passed away that the outside world really properly understood what the football club was about, why it won the title, why it wasn't just a kind of lightning bolt that came out of nowhere, why the club had a certain values and culture that came from the top that he embodied, and so on. And I think it was a for a second time, people in Leicester, fans, sort of came together. They'd come together during the title, but VSI almost brought, like I go to the supermarket and you'd see women at the checkout talking about what had happened with the helicopter crash, more than you did when they won the title. And it almost brought people back together again, and it completed the story in a way, and has given, I think, time for more reflection about Leicester, and people trying to make more sense of it. But I think we'll be trying to make sense of this for, we'll be looking back in 30 years and seeing that name, Leicester City, in the record books, and still thinking, my goodness, how did that happen? I think bit closer than 4 years ago, but still sort of getting there.
And if I can just as we're having a pint in the pub, I claim part of that experience because I was at Hull City at the time, the year before, when Leicester City was 7 points adrift at the bottom of the Premier League. They came to Hull. It was our last game before Christmas. Steve Bruce was in charge. We had the Christmas do that night, and we lost 1-0 at home, which took us 4 points back towards Leicester, as we say. So it was 7 clear. Then it was 4. It stays with me. I think we had about 30,000 shots on target that game. We still managed to lose. And I think that was the game where Leicester turned it that season. And so I think part of it is, I always claim I'm part of the architect of the Leicester story, because if we got a point that day or won, the book would not have been written. But I think you're right. 3 years later, it's still a bit raw. But if you look at what we're going through now as a country, with the coronavirus, with sport, football, everything stopped for all the right reasons, Jonathan. Heaven knows how we're going to compute what's going on now in the next few years. And you said there, Jonathan, that a book is better 2 or 3 years later than just simply an article. But 2 weeks ago, Jonathan, you wrote this article, Football, Return Change for the Better. And it was Dear Football. It was your column in the Sunday Times on March the 22nd, which is like a lifetime ago now. If I may say so, Jonathan, it was one of your best, and because you asked football certain things. But in your view, Jonathan, 3 weeks later, how does football look tonight? Because we haven't played any football, but how is it looking tonight after what it's been through with the stoppage and the way it's handled itself in these past few weeks?
Well, I mean, first of all, that to start with the letter, I guess, Michael, it was a love letter, really. It was a letter to the sport I love and we all love. But in that context, I felt right from the start of this sort of hiatus that football was going to be judged on how it behaved right now, and that football for quite a long time has needed a bit of a reality check and maybe to put things in a bit more perspective for itself. And I felt that this huge crisis that we're going through and this huge change of life, almost it forced us to sort of stop doing all the normal things and thinking the normal ways we think. And one of those normal things is how big Premier League football in particular, but football's become in our world. And I felt right from the start that this is a chance for us we love this sport, but I think it's become too big. I think it's become too self-important. I think it's got its values a little bit skewed. Whether that be, and I take full responsibility from a media point of view, it's partly the way we in the media treat it. We overblow it. We build it up. We talk about football in terms of war. We talk about it as if it's the meaning of life. It's ridiculous. It's not. This is the meaning of life, what we're going through at the moment. You can talk about money and the way that the pyramid doesn't work for anyone below the top 6, really. In England, I think that there's an opportunity to change that. And there's probably an opportunity when I see the way fans talk on social media to each other to maybe remember this is a game and this shouldn't define your identity. So there's a lot of things that I guess I've been thinking for years of, that there's something I'd like football to do, which is, I guess, kind of grow up a bit and get this perspective. And you ask, how does football look now? I think we've seen in the last 3 weeks a bit of that process taking place. The best thing that's happened, I think, the last 2 weeks has been the reaction of Liverpool fans towards furloughing and Tottenham fans and players towards furloughing, because those are 2 examples of clubs behaving in a way that football can be cynical. Football can it pretends it's not a business. It pretends it's something more than that. But then it comes down to behaving like a business. And I think the fact that the Tottenham players thought, no, we don't want this. The fact Liverpool fans thought this doesn't represent our values. To me, that's a little bit of people taking back what it should be about. I'm kind of I know I'm rambling on for you, Michael. But
you're not, Jonathan. We're having a pint in the. I can get away with this because we're in the Shankly Arms. So if ever we can get away with this discussion about Liverpool, it's in the Shankly Arms, because there was a bit of him in that decision, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I think that because the spirit of Shankly spoke, the fans spoke, and it took them 48 hours to undo that decision, didn't it?
It didn't. Shankly, that phrase that everyone comes out with, that Shankly said about, you know, life and death, and it's more important than that. The irony of what he was saying was missed. He didn't mean that literally. You'll know that. Like, we didn't mean that literally, but people take it seriously. And Shankly, you know, at heart was a man of the people, and football was for the people. If you're Shankly, I think Klopp is very popular with Liverpool fans for a number of reasons, but one of those reasons is that he's for the people as well. And that's what, I guess, to sum it up, I think we've got to remember what football's about, what sport's about, and it's to connect people, it's for communities, it's for us. It shouldn't be blown up into something that it's not, either from a financial point of view or the way we in the media talk about it. It's beautiful enough as it is.
Did you get caught up in it, Jonathan?
Totally.
If I can, you know, having a drink in the pub, am I allowed to ask you, did you get caught up in the hyperbole almost? Because we all get carried away with it?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, I kind of think about the way, you know, transfer stories I might write or get excited about, the ways you write about the game. You know, maybe you know, I'll be honest, you know, we in the media are in a way trying to piggyback on football, because football sells newspapers and it suits us to tell people how important it is, because of course it means they're going to want to read our stuff. I'm not sure we should be doing that, actually. I think what we're going through now is really important. And, you know, I'm reading stuff at the moment, and when I read stories about Manchester United need to sign Harry Kane, or, you know, where's Paul Pogba going to go? I'm not interested at the moment. That's not what this is. I'm not missing that. I'm not missing that part of my business. I'm missing being at football matches. I'm missing my pals in the press box. The thing I'm missing most of all is playing five-a-side football with my mates, even though I'm well past it. But I'm missing that more than actually being at a Premier League game and all the hype and the stuff that surrounds it. And I probably shouldn't be saying that, because I'm a, you know, football writer who tries to sell the Premier League.
That's what you said in your. That's what you said on the 22nd of March. You realised that you weren't missing. Well, not so much not missing it, but there's bits of it you certainly weren't missing, weren't there?
No, there's bits of it that I'd like. I hope don't come back, to be honest. But I'm not. I know that this is idealist. I'm realistic enough to know that we're in a period where sport is not making any money, and when it comes back, the first thing it's going to want to do is make a lot of money to make up for its losses. But if there was a way that isn't the focus anymore, if it goes back to the focus being on the game, or on the games that we love, and, you know, if we try and remember that football clubs are there to, they're there to bring communities together. They're there for the fans. You know, they're there to inspire kids to play in the local areas. That's a purpose. Of course, they have to make money, but the sport can't have it two ways. You can't say that it's more than a game, you know, or that Liverpool marketing phrase, this means more, but then go and behave like a business or behave like any other business. It has to actually behave differently if it is to mean more, and that's what I'd like to see.
Can I ask you then, Jonathan, because I give far too much thought to this, because I've got a peripheral role in the sport, and I miss it, and I miss working it. 12 months on from now, or 18 months on from now, when hopefully the game's up and running, the world's up and running, and we're talking again, we're meeting again, we might be meeting in a different way. What might football look like, Jonathan, in 12 to 18 months' time? Not just the Premier League. What will the pyramid look like? What will the National League look like? What will women's football look like in 12 to 18 months' time?
Well, I have my fears. I mean, I fear that we might come back to a terrain where it's actually gone the other way from what I want to see, where there's actually fewer clubs, where the big clubs have got more power. It's the survival of the fittest. That we just go back to it with more excitement for, I guess, the glamour and hype than ever before, because people have missed something. I'm although what I was writing about, what I've been saying is quite idealistic at heart. I suppose I'm a professional cynic because I'm a journalist. So I'm afraid I can see it. I can see, you know, opportunism, the Juventuses of the world trying to force the European Super League ever more because there's a financial need for it. The Big Six using this opportunity to buy up the best talent from clubs that need to make money. Clubs going to the wall. I'm afraid that's what my prediction would be, and I just hope it's not. But Michael, wait, as a sports psychologist, I'm just when you're talking to performers and you're talking to them about performing, your key message, would I be right in thinking your key message is would be to try and simplify things for them, would be to try and get rid of the noise and get them to focus on the key elements of what's, what sport and performance is about?
I feel sometimes, Jonathan, I'm shouting in a phone box. To use, if you can remember phone boxes, they're little red things they used to have telephones in them and all sorts. So you'd go down there with your 10p on a Saturday night. But I've always tried to get sports people, athletes, footballers back to playing like kids.
Yeah.
And I know that Wayne Rooney, who I hope, and if I forgot this wrong in the pub, it's the best place to get it wrong. But if you're helping him write those columns on the Sunday, well done, because I think we're seeing the Wayne Rooney in those columns, the real Wayne Rooney in those columns. Yeah. But if ever I was to write a book, and maybe this chance meeting in the pub will lead me to asking you how to write a book. But my book on sports psychology, I asked Tony Faulkner from VSI a few weeks back, what should I write it about? My title would probably be either A, simplicity is genius, because 90% of goals are scored within 12 yards of the goal. We can ask Brian Dean, who scored the first ever Premier League goal later. Or I think my real title would be Play Like a Child.
Yeah. Well,
I want footballers to play like kids again, and still play like kids.
That's beautiful, and that's why exactly why I asked you, because that's what I want. I want us to treat sport like kids again. That's what I'm talking. That's what I was talking about in Dear Football. Whether it's journalists, fans, players, people involved, that's what we need to get back to.
Well, as you know, it's no trade secret. My role was with Brentford recently for the last 3 or 4 years. A wonderful, innovative club in West London. Our club song is "We're just a bus stop in Hounslow," and that's the fun of it. And we've got some incredibly talented young players who are on the verge of going a league higher, either with us or because of the transfer market. And one of them this summer was linked with clubs in the Premier League. And I remember, and he won't mind me saying this, and the name's not important now. One day we can discuss it, and the name and the player himself. But all the rumours were circulating in June and July and up to the deadline. But 5 years ago, he was playing non-league football in front of 130 people. And then it was the National League, and then it was League Two, and then it was the Championship with Brentford. And I stopped him in the car park one morning. He looked tense and anxious and just cross. He was just cross. And I just remember saying to the young man, I said, 5 years ago, you were playing in front of 130 people, just for the sheer hell of it, and bringing your own shin pads and no kit person and the rest of it. And I said, I don't care. I do care what you do with your life, because I'm close to the young man as in many ways at the club, and I'm very keen for him to do well. But I don't want him to lose that 130 people attendance figure in his head, because that's why he loves playing football. And when he does go higher, and he will go higher, I hope he never loses that childlike joy of the game. And maybe through this wretched situation, we can all get that childlike enjoyment back of sport, not just football, but sport in general. And playing foot five-a-side with your mates, even if your hamstring goes, doing your boots up, it doesn't really matter, does it?
It doesn't. I mean, that five-a-side I play is that can be the best hour of my week, outside of the kids. And if I manage to do something half decent, which relatively isn't that decent at all, I'll be happy for the rest of the week. How ridiculous is that? It's a rubbish game of five-a-side football, but it's magic. It's just pure magic. I after writing the Dear Football piece, I spoke to a few kind of people around the game. I wanted to get a response, and I spoke to a guy called Derek Ely, who is Britain's oldest fan. He's supposed to be Britain's oldest fan anyway. He's 104, Derby County supporter. And he told me about going to the 1946 FA Cup final when he came back from the war. And he still goes to Derby matches. And that's a guy of, the life he's lived. and he's still got that connection that he had when he was a young man, and that, you know, without getting too idealistic again, that's what it's about. It's not whether Paul Pogba is going to go to Juventus or Real Madrid or whatever. I mean, of course, people are interested in that, but should we really, you know, fans wanting to change managers every 6 months, fans wanting to sign the next player, I just think we need to get away from that madness. We need to enjoy what we've got.
Believe it or not, I'm not a Liverpool fan, but my dog's called Shankly because he captivated me as a leader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as the statue says, he made the people happy. And I think Klopp has made people happy.
Yeah.
And I think that night, I actually turned down a ticket, would you believe, to Liverpool-Barcelona because I thought it was a dead tie. And I was working in London the next morning. I thought I won't get back in time. And I've got a picture, my screensaver for any presentation I'm ever asked to make again after the world opens again, is the final whistle and the staff and the players singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" and "Imagine" in front of the Kop. And I've counted 6 mobile phone lights during that moment.
Fantastic.
6. Normally there's 56,000 taking a picture of I was going to say Harry Kane not taking a corner, but past that argument, but receiving a corner. You know, we take a picture of anything, but at that moment when they were singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" and then "Imagine," because the second longest stadium announcer after Peter Gillam at Brentford, and that's a lovely interview, by the way, put on "Imagine," and no one was on their phone. And I thought, he's made the people happy again. And isn't that the point of football and sport?
That is what it's about. And that, you know, a journalistic cliche sometimes is that you couldn't make it up, you couldn't script it. Who writes this player's script? And that night you're talking about, Michael, you know, Liverpool's winning goal comes from a kid who grew up, basically could see the training ground from his bedroom window, and he's playing in a team of multinational superstars. But the winning goal comes from Trent Alexander-Arnold having an idea in his head, a bit outside the box, taking that corner that he did, executing it, substitute scoring, super sub against Lionel Messi and best club of the modern era. It's ridiculous. We started talking about the Leicester thing. That was ridiculous. You can't. One of the reasons it's hard to film sport sometimes or make it into films is the scripts it writes itself are better than Hollywood or whatever can come up with. And that Liverpool night was part of it. How could you seriously propose a script where Liverpool beat Barcelona 4-0 and this kid from across the road from Melwood is the key figure in it? I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's wonderful, isn't it?
The best bit is he had the courage to take the quick corner because, as you know, as I know, set plays are now almost American football in terms of their preparation. And he looked up, he spotted it, he turned around, he took it. And the best bit is a few weeks later when one of the stewards, who's about even older than you and me, he's walking back in his in his Dayglow jacket, and he whips in the quick corner in his dreams. And I think that's why he's made the people happy. But going back to the article, which reads better now 3 weeks later, a bit like your book 3 years later, if I can say so. There's a lot of I did click through the replies to it. There's a lot of anger out. There was a lot of anger out there too, as well. There was some anger out there from football people. They were cross with football. They were cross with football people. And we're going to speak in a minute in the snug to the first ever goal scorer, Brian Dean, in the first ever goal in the Premier League. Why are people so angry about football and sport at the minute, or football in particular?
Yeah, I feel quite strongly about this. I mean, people seem to be angry in particular at footballers for earning too much money or for not being part of the real world or whatever. Now, absolute opposite is my experience. I think as a section of society, footballers and football people are as humble as you get relative to their wealth, but just humble anyway. They're in tune with where they come from. They've got a sense of community in what they do. They're really good people. And this kind of like discontent with sport and the glitz of it that I was trying to write about, it seems to have been transferred onto the players. That's not where it needs to lie. Players are good people, by and large. Yes, of course, there's a couple of examples, but the players are good people. But at the moment, I think there is anger because Football's become this lightning rod that, and because it's been blown up too much, it's become this lightning rod. So, you get to Armistice Day. What's football doing about it? There's a disaster in the world. How is the Premier League going to mark this disaster? Ridiculous. Coronavirus has caused everybody to, I don't know, look inward, to pause. We're all struggling mentally in different ways, and an outlet has become Premier League football because it's become too big in our world. And I'm afraid it looks like football is at the sharp end of that a way of venting discontent with my job's under pressure. Well, then I'm angry at footballers. I mean, why not be angry at bankers, or why not?
That's what I didn't understand. I didn't get the anger aimed at one group of people who, in my experience, are as generous as I've ever come across in any walk of life.
Totally, absolutely. But why aren't they angry at racing drivers, or why aren't they angry at golfers? I mean, it's football. It's uniquely football. Maybe there's a class element to it as well. I don't know.
Why is that, Jonathan? Because you study the game, you think about the game, you reflect about the game. I didn't get that, and I'm not from a football background. You can tell by the look of me, the sound of me. I'm just not. I mean, I was banned from watching football at my school. So when I was banned because they didn't like football. They thought it was they didn't like football. They wanted to play other sports, and I railed against it. I shouldn't say this now on live, but I nearly got expelled for smuggling their telly to watch Match of the Day. When I appeared on BBC News during the World Cup from Russia, it must have run out of people to talk to. They spoke to me on ITN and BBC News that night, because other news channels, of course, are available. And I remember thinking that one school teacher who said, he looked at me, he said, "You'll never work in football." And that was the motivation, age 14, to work in football. And it came, and I thought of him that night. I thought, there you go, sir, I'm working in football, so have a bit of that back. But I don't get the anger at football, because it's a meritocracy. It's full of good people, from the kit person through to the canteen to the car park. And I didn't get the anger at football. I don't understand it now. But can I ask you one further question? Because time's our enemy. I was speaking to a performance director in rugby union just last week for a similar type broadcast. And rugby went professional in 1995, and I think he went professional as a player in 1995.
Yeah.
And now rugby is in the same position as everyone else and every other sport. And he said, this is rugby's biggest ever opportunity to reset itself since 1995, because the game has gone in a certain direction. Can football do exactly the same thing? Is this its biggest ever opportunity to reform and reset?
Yeah, it is 100%. David Bernstein, the former FA head, Manchester City, of course, really interesting thoughts today. I think it was reported in the Telegraph about how there is a chance now to maybe redraw, from a regulation point of view, how club football England works. And he proposed, I mean, he was talking really about finances, and he was saying there could be a new kind of licensing system where it's not just about fit and proper owners, but it's about financial responsibility towards clubs lower down. How the club fits in from that point of view, so that the top clubs are playing a role in clubs throughout the pyramid. And I think that's great. I think there's a big chance for us to redraw a system where more money trickles down, where maybe there's a sort of buddy system or partner system between big clubs and smaller clubs, where there's something more serious is being done to try and protect grassroots. But I think, as well as that, I'd like to see clubs licensed fit and proper persons test or fit and proper club test be based on community work, or how a club behaves towards its community, how a club behaves generally. I know it might be hard to set the definitions, but it's something that puts in place the idea that a club has to treat people around it properly, and whether that starts with the area around the stadium, and it also starts with what they do within the local schools and all that kind of stuff. I'd really like to see some kind of refocusing, and the only way I can think of doing it is regulation. And I'm not like a regulator, I don't think sport is great when it comes to that, but I'm afraid, because of what I said earlier, left to its own devices, football won't do it. So we've got to do something in place. We've got to get more money trickling down, and we've got to force clubs to be a bit more responsible.
Yeah. And tonight, Jonathan, we haven't got enough Fergie time, and I think you'd like more Fergie time, but we can't tonight. I'm going to hand over to Tim to ask some questions, because the questions have been coming in this evening, Jonathan. But just before we go, my last question, and it's my light question, because I think, well, I know I could talk all night and listen to you all night about the future of football. You've been lucky because you've interviewed some extraordinary people across the world of football. Can I ask you, what's the most entertaining, interesting, that interview you think that was extraordinary? Not for the content in terms of the depth and all that goes with it. What was that interview you thought, my word, that just was different?
It's a hard one, because you interview so many people that, and what you do is you build yourself up to make that interview the most important thing that you do, and then you move on to the next one. So I've always got a recency bias, and it's hard. But I'll give you a couple. I don't know if you've ever heard of a player called Chick Charnley.
Yes.
Connoisseurs of Scottish football in the 90s will definitely know Chick Charnley, a real maverick, a kind of Scottish Letitia, but plus. Should have been a fun, should have been 50 caps for Scotland, but just a bam pot, as they would say in Glasgow. And he's having one of his kind of brief spells where he was doing really well. He was playing for Partick Thistle. Bit of a checkered sort of life that he was living, but I was sent to go and interview him, and it's the only interview that I've ever been involved in when money changed hands, because Chick wouldn't speak for more than and I can say the fee now. It was 200 quid. It wasn't anything. I worked for Scotland on Sunday, which was respectable broadsheet newspaper. Never ever paid for interviews, but this was the deal. And it was almost like, well, okay, it's Chick Charnley, and fine. And I went along to this interview. Chick could be quite sort of fierce. Went there with a photographer who just didn't know anything about football whatsoever. And I said, just please don't say anything. Just let me sort of let me sort of deal with this. Went to this tenement building in Glasgow. Knocked on the door. Chick invited us up, and basically, have you got the money? And I handed this envelope, and he counted it out in front of us. And for some reason, the photographer sort of said, Ali McCoist, Ali McCoist. And Chick was a big Celtic fan. And it was halfway through counting this money, and I had a look. He was, you could see in his mind, am I going to kick these guys out of the house? And then he went back to the money and thought, no, I think I'll just have the rest. We got the interview, and he was good. Another one with Pierre Van Hooijdonk.
Yes.
Interviewed him at Celtic, set it up. I don't know if you remember, Pierre at the time was in when he was at Celtic, he ended up in a wage dispute with the board, and he'd been promised. He said anyway, he'd been promised a wage rise if he scored a certain amount of goals. And then the board sort of reneged on it, and he did this interview in Holland where he basically was being paid £7,000 a week, and he wanted £10,000 a week. And the headline from the interview was £7,000 a week. That might be okay for a homeless guy, but not for Pierre Van Hooijdonk. That was his take on it. So I was trying to interview him about that, and he agreed the interview. I turned up, and he did that thing where he completely tried to give me the slip. So, spoke to the receptionist. Oh no, Pierre's not here. I knew he was there because I'd spoken to a fan outside, and his car was still there. And I left the media room, went to the front entrance, and I managed to intercept him on the way out. And Pierre said, no, I didn't agree to this interview. And I was like, no, you did. He said, okay, you've got 2 minutes. So in front of all these fans who were waiting for his autograph, I started trying to do this interview. And I got through one question. Pierre gave it a kind of cursory answer. I got halfway through the second interview, and he took out this watch that was as big as a hubcap, and he just watched the second hand tick round to the hour, and he just went, that's 2 minutes, and he just walked off. And of course, I got a good piece out of it, because the piece was all about the non-interview rather than the interview. So I've just given you two stories from Scotland that they didn't
Well,
work.
one day, Jonathan, I think we've already agreed. One day, when all this passes, we'll meet for a coffee, or we might get a glass of something somewhere together. In the meantime, John, firstly, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand back to Tim because he's got some questions which have been written in. And then Brian Dean, the first ever goal scorer in the Premier League, has a special guest for us and for you to talk to also. But in the meantime, Jonathan, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you in the Bill Shankly arms. And that quote is on my wall over there, upsides the picture with Pele and Bobby Moore. So that tells my area. Jonathan, thanks for now. And Tim, are you there with some questions?
I am indeed. Thanks, Michael. Really good. It's interesting. I read something very recently about the study that was done about why the anger, or the what do you call it before? It's about the passion, predominantly to do with football. Now, I'm not saying that any other sport is less passionate, but the fans seem to be more passionate and more involved when it comes to a football game, and it's that transference of that passion, whether they win, lose, or draw. That transference, as you well know as a psychologist, as I do, is as soon as you transfer that into different areas, you look for a target, and the target predominantly are the players in football, because they're an easy target, because we put them on pedestals in the media. Sorry, just to build on that. I'd love to have a sit and discuss about it further.
We haven't got Fergie time. We've got limited time. So
we've got limited time. First one was a great question. This is from Jane. What are your thoughts on the way football leaders, the EPL, EFL, and FIFA are managing COVID-19 situation currently? And there's a second part to it. I'm transitioning to our world afterwards. How do you suggest clubs manage their fan experience in the community? They're great questions.
Wow. I mean, looking at the COVID response, I think at the moment you see the priority being still based around finances, still based around when do we play again, when can we start getting our money back, sort of thing. And I do understand that from a business point of view, but if you look at Premier League level, the Premier League hasn't actually lost any revenue yet. The TV money has been paid for the year. Season ticket money has been banked. Now there might be a time that you know, the TV companies may ask for some of it back. The indications are that Sky aren't going to, and BT aren't going to, but maybe some of the foreign broadcasters will. But they haven't lost any money yet, so that's theoretical. The fans might want a refund, but it hasn't happened yet. And the point is that all we're hearing right now is, when do we get back to playing, or can we take some money from the players, or can we furlough our staff? And it still says to me that there's an obsession with the bottom line, and I'm not particularly impressed by that response. I think footballers, to go back to something I was saying earlier, have been great. You can see the value of what they do in communities. You can see their willingness to take initiative for the NHS fund and other stuff they're doing. But I'm not sure the people at the top have really been acting to the right principles so far. Was the second part of that what?
Yeah, it was how would you suggest that the clubs manage their fan experience and community after this pandemic?
Well, there's easy stuff that should have happened already, like a sort of limit on away fan ticket prices, probably a greater limit on old age pensioners. I think most. I mean, Leicester City are great for kids. I'm not sure if all Premier League clubs are the same. But again, you know, you have to start with pricing. You have to start with also how fixtures get arranged. The number of fixtures that involve northern clubs in London at times where there's railway work going on, or the kickoff time's too late for people to get back. We've got to stop doing all this sort of stuff. We've got to actually start thinking about fans. And I think the other thing is that COVID has probably given people. I think there is a greater feeling among all of us of community at the moment, because we are going back to relying on friends and the people around us. And I think football should try and tap into that and try and do things to bring fans closer to players, to bring fans closer to the inside. And I think the media should probably do that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. That really is a great shout. The more we think about the fans and the fan base, ultimately they're our end users, aren't they? They're our customers. Next question is from Greg, and this is kind of going to put you on the spot. So, if you were head coach for the Scottish national team, okay, what would be your approach to managing the media and managing the demands of the club? So you'd be sat between the both of them there. Not to put you on the spot much.
Oh wow, probably team's a bit easier than, I mean, Scotland's actually got some good players, so I think there's an opportunity there to do something with the, you know, the likes of John McGinn and Andy Robertson and Scott McTominay and there's plenty of guys coming through, Ryan Fraser. I think that it just needs to be. I think it's the hardest. How do you stop Scotland's historic ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? That's a really difficult. That's one for Michael psychologically. But you know, I'd just like to see positivity. There's been a lot of Scottish managers that have tried to sort of grind their way through stuff, and I actually think there's an opportunity for Scotland to, because of the profile of players they've got, just to have a bit more of a go and to reflect more the Scottish character. How you manage the Scottish media? I mean, I have to say I miss the Scottish media terribly. I absolutely love there's more of a sense of community there than you know I've seen in journalism, and I think they're quite easy to manage. You've just got to never mention the old firm at all. Never voice an opinion on anything to do with the old firm, and just about be all right. But Scottish media are fine. Just, you know, give everyone something to believe in, fans as well.
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount of goodwill.
Okay, lost you a little bit there, but I'm just going to pass you back over. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. You've answered it really transparently and with candidism. So very, very, very honest answers there. Michael, I'm going to pass this back to you because I'm just making sure we're on time.
We are on time for once in our lives, and we've got a couple of special guests here. But to answer Jonathan's question about Scotland, is maybe they can play like kids now as well. They can play more car park football again, because you mentioned that the young player at Chelsea, you mentioned Andy Robertson, you mentioned John McGinn. There's some wonderful players north of the border, and maybe it's time for them to play like kids as well, rather than far too much information, because we can get drunk on information. Jonathan, I'm back, but I'm going to hand you straight over to a good friend of ours at VSI, Brian Dean. And he's got a particularly special guest of his in his snug tonight, because I think they go back a long way as well. And they could probably talk for hours about the stuff they got up to, because they're good people and they're good players. And they've got that little thing football does. You get that little bond, and you try breaking that bond because it's unbreakable. So, Brian, in Harrogate, how are you?
Sorry, 1 second. There you know, Brian. Sorry.
There he is. Brian, how are you?
I'm good. I'm here in just looking out of my window. The sun's still shining, so I'm happy.
And who have you got in the snug? Because you've got Jonathan Northcroft in Leicester. Who's in the snug in Suffolk with you tonight?
So I've got a very good friend of mine. We played together at Leicester, room together. And you know, we've stayed in touch ever since. That was a long time. That was, what, 17 years ago, 18 years ago. Talk a lot, you know, bounce opinions off each other. You know, and obviously that means we respect each other's opinions. So that is James Scowcroft. You know, so yeah.
He's looking at you now.
How are you, James? All right?
I'm very well. Yourself?
Yeah. I'm good, thanks. I've really enjoyed. I found it fascinating listening to Jonathan. I think from our point of view as players, and you know, we've transitioned now, so we're now looking at football almost from the outside in, and thinking about the kind of things that we've done in football and how things are going to change. What I want to ask you is, do you think it opens up opportunities now for young English players to come through because of what's potentially going to happen with clubs' budgets? Are clubs going to change, do you think, in any way, or are we going to get back to just how it was? Is that what clubs are looking to do? What's your thoughts?
I don't think it will, Brian, because I think the situation abroad from a football financial point of view is a lot worse than what it is in our country. So, listen, everything is going to come down in the world in many different areas. But if you look, for example, if you look in France at the moment, Canal Plus have withheld their money to the league. Media Pro in Spain are doing similar. So, unfortunately, the foreign players are as good as the English players, but they're cheaper, and that's always going to be the case until Brexit. And the new Brexit rules, if they go through what they're being proposed at the moment, that's the biggest game changer I see in English football. I don't see this reset that everybody else sees. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of share your thoughts in a way, in that, the first responsibility to a club is to win, and if they can get the best players cheaper, they're going to go for the quick win, unfortunately. I mean, we can talk about developing our clubs and making them more robust over a number of years, but having played under some owners, they're looking at a quick fix from their point of view. While they're in charge, it's their legacy.
But Brian, whatever the dynamics, clubs are always going to spend more money than what they actually have to get those players. Now, me and Jonathan go back a little while because we used to work a lot together on the time. So Jonathan mentions, will there be more money that gets filtered through the system into the lower leagues? But actually, see, the more money that goes into the bottom leagues, the more problems you'll get, because they'll just overspend it. So if you look at Bury's problems, money was the problem because they overspent. The whole football nation's watched Sunderland Till I Die recently. And if you look at the money that's come down to, they just didn't know how to handle it, and they spent money ultimately that they didn't have. So that's always going to be the cycle. It's happened before the TV boom, and it will happen again. And until you can probably get different ownerships into football clubs and get more of a control and more of a sustainability, you're just going to repeat the cycle.
Yeah. So James, just moving on slightly. I mean, I've got a second question for you, but can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now yourself?
So I've sort of set myself up, Brian, really set myself up my own football company, and it's something that I thought I needed when I was a player. So I'm currently working with some individuals, footballers, on a one-to-one on performance basis, which has gone very well, and we've talked privately about. And there's players at the very, very top, which are now going outside their clubs for extra help and extra, just that extra 1-2%. And I'm also heavily involved in recruitment, going around Europe, watching players, seeing different types of structures, how it works for different people, really. So that's as long as just still doing some media work as well. So I enjoy what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because I know, like you say, me and you talk a lot. Now, do you see clubs improving their role in the development of players? I mean, when we were at Leicester together, we talked about, people used to say to me when I came out of football, what about becoming a striker coach? And we're like, yeah, well, we can see the need for that, but realistically, how do you feel that is going to become more of a responsibility of clubs or not?
You'd like to say yes. We go back to, Jonathan lives in Leicester. We've lived in Leicester as well. This is going back a long time now, almost 20 years ago. I used to go watch Leicester Tigers. And I felt, and I still do, if anyone watches other sports, which I do, that the detail that they went into. I remember watching Leicester Tigers playing and looking at the detail that they went into. They had the army of coaches in a box on their laptops. They had forward, midfield coaches, and this is a long, long time. If you look at cricket, how cricket is taught, and we all watch the Ashes when it comes, and the breakdown that they go into in parts of the game. Football's a long, long way behind on a lot of this, and I think one or two people are slowly starting to cotton on. But in football, Brian, we've experienced it. You get this sort of lack of education that just repeats itself, because you'd go to most Premier League training grounds, most are doing the same drills. You go to most people that work in recruitment, they're watching the same players. And it's also
it's interesting. Yeah, I'm going to say it's interesting, isn't it? Because, like I say, to a degree, both yourself and myself have looked at the game outside, and we've looked at how it's being run on the inside, and you almost want to be able to tell people and guide people about how to improve. You know, both myself and yourself of what in footballing terms they call it a famine, and it's when you go sort of like 4 or 5 games without scoring. It's more of a psychological thing then.
Yeah, it is. And unfortunately, you know, earlier on, you know, people mentioned, you know, go and be that kid in the playground. It's impossible to do. You're playing at a level where you are so judged. And I don't know that one of the best things I've watched in the last 3 weeks on this lockdown is, I think it's Michael Calvin, The Game. Jonathan, he wrote a book, and then BT Sport. And there's a lad called Drew Broughton who's mentioned on it as well, and he literally said your life gets pulled away from you, the rug, and it does. And as soon as I said that, I thought I know exactly what you've got. For 15, 18 years, you give your life to football. You're not in control of your life. You haven't got that destiny that you think you've got in your hands. And I always say the worst thing about football is the age that you actually play it. If only you could play it 10 years later when you've got a little life experience, you'd be able to handle situations better.
I'll always remember, and I look back at my career, and I always think I stopped actually enjoying football when I left Sheffield United the first time, because everything I did was instinct. I was given that freedom, and then when I went into a more serious situation, shall we say, it became a job. Yeah, and people will.
I stopped at 16. I stopped enjoying it at 16. I left school, went straight into a real ruthless, tough environment. And you think, nothing's prepared me for this. This is totally the opposite. So I thought of being a professional. And it is a little bit sink and swim. And you literally just have to get through on your survival instincts. And at the end of your career, you actually start to gain knowledge of, I'm overthinking it a little bit. I can control, I can turn off from negative people in the media, negative teammates, negative managers, negative people in the crowd. This wave of negativity just comes from you from day one.
Lads, is there anything you could have done to enjoy it more, though? I mean, does it have to be that way?
It's, to be honest, it's literally a jungle. You know what I mean? And if you haven't got that ability that I have the tiger, there's a piece of meat on the table that is mine. If you go in there with the attitude of, listen, guys, come on, share with me, you ain't getting anything. It is a tough school. And it's sometimes I remember when I was at Leeds, and when I'd just gone there, and my first year was a bit of a struggle there. And I remember I'd pull up to the front gates, and as soon as I pulled up to the front gates, I'd have that twisted feeling in my stomach, because there were things outside of my control, and I wasn't enjoying it. And every player goes through that, but it's how you come out of it the other side. And it's you're building up your resilience all the time, but it ain't easy.
Brian, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
And this has turned into something we didn't expect this evening, I can assure you. Brian, I came from a horse racing background originally. I was a Gordon Taylor of another sport, horse racing, jockeys. And jockeys are as tough as, they don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't do anything. They just get hurt, basically, and out in hospital and skinned. And they're a remarkable group of people. I've worked in most sports, mainstream sports. I work in rugby union as well, James. And I work in cricket. And I've found that even though I've had a lot of practice now and I've got semi-competent at it, football's still the one industry that's still learning to talk and ask for a bit of help and a bit of understanding, because you parked at Ellen Rowe with that twisted feeling in your gut. And I think what football still does is goes, I'll get on with it. And Drew has mentioned it, and when he spoke to Michael Calvin, football is still very slow, and footballers are going, give me a hand here because I'm struggling. Because jogging out in front of 40,000 people who are calling you an X, Y, and Z if you miss a goal is not normal. And yet still football finds it really hard to talk.
No, it isn't. And again, it comes down to being able to recruit the right people with the right understandings of what's going on in those situations. And, you know, if you look at, sometimes you look at owners of clubs, they think it's easy. I mean, I watched the documentary Sunderland Till I Die as well, and the guy's being told not to pay more than a certain amount for a player, and he still goes out and spends 2-3 times the amount against the better judgment of professional advice. So it is a difficult
Michael,
industry.
yeah. So to answer that question, the problem you got with football is it is so intense and it is so judgmental that it's impossible to play in front of 40,000 people, to play in front of millions on TV, people, wonderful people like Jonathan Wright, but miss a good goal scoring chance that doesn't win, and people not judge you.
I know that, and I know that because I work and I try and help them through it. And
yeah, you can't. And I've always got a theory about footballers: the ones who unintelligent is possibly the wrong. The ones who actually aren't aware of who they are and what they're doing are actually the best footballers. The ones that think about it and become
overthinking's an illness, as I always say. Thinking too much is worse than your hamstring going. That is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's for another day. But it's been. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt your conversation, but I had to, Brian, because when that twisted gut
I think we're going to pass it over. Andy's got a question that's a burning question. They're going to jump in.
It might be the last of the night, I'm afraid, but we'll.
Yeah. And Andy, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was just sitting listening to all three of the guys and reflecting on contributions that players have made, but it still strikes me there's a void of leadership across the board. And I'm interested to know from each of you, starting with Jonathan maybe, you've all encountered great leaders during the course of your careers. Jonathan, you've interviewed some of the great and the good of football for some time. Who would be the finest leader that you have encountered?
Well, I mean, you're asking an Aberdeen fan who grew up with the great team of the 80s. That, I mean, but genuinely, it would be Alex Ferguson. I always find the managers are the most interesting to interview, without a doubt. Klopp, amazing. Nuno Espirito Santo, interviewed him recently, but Fergie's he's just above everyone else. The layers of complexity that guy has to him, the way he's planned ahead. I was speaking to an ex-United player only today who told a lovely story about Fergie pointing at a youth team player and saying, in 18 months' time, he'll be playing in my League Cup team. The way he was the director of football himself, as well as being a manager, as well as being this kind of, energy charge for the dressing room is incredible. And speaking to him, both intimidating, charming, a guy who knows everything there is to know about football, but knows a lot about life as well. Just everything. And that's before you even get to what he achieved. So, without a doubt, the best manager I've interviewed from an interviewing point of view, and the best manager I think there's ever been.
James, can I ask the same question of you? Because VSI is in the business of delivering leadership programs that equip many people for serious roles in sport. And James, I'd ask you the same question. Who's the best leader you've engaged with, and why?
It's a good question, actually, and it's people often ask, who's the best man? I don't really have one, but the one person who was totally different, who had the man management skills, and I always believe someone who's a good leader can give you different messages as well. They haven't just got the one consistent message, that they can. I had a spell plan under Neil Warnock, and I thought his man management skills were very, very good. Were very good, and I saw. He's got the record of most promotions. If you actually look at Neil's career, and he probably doesn't get taken as seriously as what he should do, but if you actually look at his career as a manager, it's highly successful. And he goes into clubs, he goes into clubs that are massively underperforming, and his record of turning teams, clubs around without real money is very, very good. I think a couple of you are based in Yorkshire. He went into Rotherham 3 or 4 years ago when Rotherham were literally dead and buried. And he turned, and they literally went from being where you're down, you just can't get out of that situation, to turn around. So I had 18 months with him, and I saw how he worked, and I saw a total different approach to any other manager that I've worked with.
Could you give
I'll
me?
give you an example. I'll give you more detail to that. So we were playing with Crystal Palace, and we'd let in a few goals, and we had some defensive problems. And you get all these wonderful coaches with these bright ideas, and now you get all these analytical people that come in and try and basically overcomplicate, overcloud the situation. And we actually trained on the Selhurst Park pitch. This is at Crystal Palace, and he turns up halfway through training, and we're doing a defensive session, and he stops it all. He gets a handful of balls, he drops one ball, and he kicks it, which isn't the main stand at Crystal Palace, isn't that? He kicks it over the stand. All 22 players watch this ball roll up the stand and sort of just about go over. And he said, "Let me tell you here, in 105 years of this football club, no one's ever scored from the car park. So when you defend, put the ball in the car." And he just walked in. And that was, and all these players just were still looking at the top of this roof. And we just spent an hour and a half going into so much little detail. And that was a little bit of detail where somebody grabbed a moment and sorted a problem out there and then, and was very clear. And look, this is the point.
That's brilliant. Listen, guys, I'm going to hand you back to Michael. And Michael, you could sum up and pass over to Tony. But I'd like to express my thanks for everybody's contributions tonight. Absolutely fascinating.
I'll try and be brief because that was fascinating. James, thank you. Brian, thank you. And Harrogatshire. And Jonathan, in the fearless county of Leicestershire, thank you very much for your time. It sparked off lots of debates and questions. The great thing is not everyone has to agree with each other, but it's fueled the stimulation here. So thank you all very much for your contributions this evening. Jonathan, and I hope we can meet for that pint one day and then get Brian and James back together again. So thank you all very much. And I'm going to hand back to Tony in the beer garden, somewhere close to Manchester City's training ground, no doubt. Tony, you still there?
Popped inside from the beer garden, Michael. It's a little bit chilly outside. So,
that's just so poor. But never mind.
We've got the fire working, but never mind. Jonathan, as always, thanks for your time. Insightful. Could have carried on talking for a lot longer than we did. Depending on how how much longer we're in this lockdown, we might get you back on.
Pleasure, Tony. That'd be nice. Thank you.
Look forward, but really appreciate your time. James, Brian, appreciate your comments and input. Also, Brian, looks forward to seeing you in the snug next week. And for everyone that's on the platform, next week we've got the Dream Team on with us. The Dream Team consists of John Walters and Robert, who played together at Stoke City. For those of you who don't know or don't follow social media, have a look at the banter between those guys and the stick that they throw each other over the course of their careers. So we've got them on as guest drinkers with us next week. So we look forward to that. And in between time, stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Night, everyone.
Night.